Hello, my name is Drennan Kessinger, and I'm going to talk about open source. So let's start with the definition. Open source is software that is developed, tested, or improved through public collaboration and distributed with the idea that must then be shared with others, ensuring an open future collaboration. So what does this mean? So think about open source software using this example. You have a Ford. It's a reliable car. A lot of people own them. There's a lot of people that can work on them. And if you need a certain part, there's a lot of parts available. Then you have a Porsche. The Porsche is sleek. It runs really quickly, but it will inevitably break down. And when it does, there's not a whole lot of people that can work on it, and parts are few and far between. And then you have this third car. It's mysterious. You've never seen it before. It runs quickly. It looks good, but it's made up of all different parts from all different sorts of cars. It has the newest engines, everything you could think of, and everyone works on it. It goes from one person to another, and everyone adds their own unique upgrade to it. So think about the Ford as Microsoft. Think about the Porsche as Apple, and think about the third car as open source software. So just kind of a brief history. So in 1984, Richard Stallman formed SFF, Free Software Foundation. The open source initiative was formed in 1998, which we'll talk about later. The term open source was coined in Palo Alto in the late 1990s, and Netscape was the first open source software available. So the Open Source Initiative, this is a non-for-profit that is on a global scale. It's a software development method, and the idea is to bring software with higher quality, better reliability, greater flexibility, and lower cost. And they are able to do this based on distributed peer review and the transparency of the process. And the idea here behind the initiative is to end vendor lock-in, and we'll talk about that later. So what is the criteria for open source? Well, three main things. One, free distribution, meaning anyone can acquire it without cost. Source code, meaning that the source code of the software, the base, must come with the software and any upgrades. And then derived works, meaning that any derived works from a source code must also be available. So how is this possible? Well, through open source software licensing. It allows software to be freely used, modified, and shared. So one of the most common licenses is the MIT license, and it's used by NetCore and Rails. And basically the MIT license just says that this software is able to be modified, edited, redistributed by anyone who so desires. So proprietary software. This is the opposite of open source software. So this is software that's owned by a company. The source code is kept secret. And so the two big companies are Apple and Microsoft. You can't edit their software. Once you own it, you're stuck. This is vendor lock-in. So what vendor lock-in is when a company sells you software and they're the only ones who can work on it. They're the only ones who sell it. You have to go through them to get all your upgrades, any fixes you may need. And so that can be very costly to a user. And that's how they make a lot of the revenue. So how is open source software developed? Well, it starts with a concept. A concept is just an idea that's batted around by a few people, and finally one or two people decide to begin working on it, and that's when it becomes bootstrapped. And that's whenever you'll have 1 to 2 main contributors to an idea, to a concept, and once they begin working on it, then you'll have early development. And this is whenever you'll have a few people working on it, and you'll have the main people, but then also a couple contributors here and there. Then you'll have early adoption, and that's when you'll get a few users. You'll have maybe a dozen users of the program, and they'll begin. Then also you'll have more and more contributors editing the software and trying to upgrade it. And then you'll have development. And this is where you'll have a whole lot of people working on it, and the software will be moving around from group to group, and everyone will be adding their own little touch. Then you'll have adoption, and this is where you'll have over 100 users, and people will begin using it fairly regularly. Then you'll have maturity, and this is where a lot of people who are very familiar with the product will begin using the product. And then finally mainstream, and this is something like Ubuntu or Linux, and this is, which we'll talk about later, and this is when it's known by pretty much everyone. So if you're a company, what are some things you should consider when you're going to choose some type of open source software? Well, 5 main things: analytic capabilities, training and support. Can your employees learn how to use this software? Also, can you support it? Can your tech staff edit, modify it, make any changes that are necessary? Data set size, can this hold all the data that you need? And then project size, can this software take on a project that you are thinking about taking on? And then also reputational risk. That's just being smart and using peer review and making sure that you're purchasing or going to begin using a product that people have good reviews on and looks good. Open source software today. So 78% of companies interviewed in this survey used some type of open software, whether all different ranges, and 93% of those using open source software increased or had the same OSS usage that next year, which means that whenever they began using open source software, they found that it was useful and they began using it again. Now, 3% use no open source software at all. Linux. So Linux is a very popular open source software. Linus Torvalds is the principal author, and this is popular because it's a very customizable operating system for your computer, and it's used by a lot of different people, and a lot of derived works have came from this. Ubuntu is derived from Linux. It's one of the most popular. Distro is the lingo they use. It's a distro program of Linux, and it's a great example of how open source works. You get to see that they took the base of Linux and then they were able to modify it and come up with their own operating system, Ubuntu. This is a unique system because you can actually download this operating system onto a hard drive or a CD and then plug it into any computer or desktop that you want, any laptop, and that laptop or computer will begin running Ubuntu as its operating source, completely just ignoring the computer's own operating system inside the computer. So why should businesses use open source software? Well, a couple things: increased security, better quality. The customizability is a huge thing because every company is different, so you can tailor your software around your needs. Freedom. With that being said, with customizability, you're now allowed to make any changes that you may need. Flexibility. Cost. It's cost free. All you have to do is work on it. Also, you can try it before you buy it, basically, which means before you decide to install the software, you can do test run. You can download it for a trial and see if you like it. Bloomberg has used open source software recently, has become a big proponent as they've used it, and it's really increased how their organization is run. So it's not just for businesses. Open source software is available to everyone, and some programs that everyone should download. OpenOffice, it's a program that is a replacement for Microsoft Office. ClamWin is a security system. It's free antivirus. It will replace Norton and McAfee. And then MusicCube is a music storage system that should replace your iTunes. And so these are just things that you can use in your everyday life to help make your life easier. So thank you for listening, and I encourage you to do some research on this topic because it's very interesting and there's a lot of capabilities out there for businesses and also just in everyday life. And here are my